Good day and welcome to the introduction of data replication for LSNAP and LS Central. My name is Wayne Radu. With this video, I will demonstrate how to set up an LS Cronus environment so that we can replicate data from one database to another. The demo environment that I will be using can be downloaded from LS Retail's website, or you can set up your own environment and just install all the relevant software that we will be covering in this video. For both options, you will need to be an LS Retail partner to get access to the software. With a demo environment, I will teach you the basics of how to replicate data between databases or sites and how to set it up. This is very useful for sites that are offline where distributed databases are deployed and where data needs to be updated on a regular basis. So let's just get familiar with the different types of environments before we move on to our running environment. So let's look at what is an online environment. So for online environments, you will most likely only have a single database for the head office site, which is normally your central database where all the nav or Business Central users connect to when performing their daily tasks. And because there are no other databases, replication is not required. This database might be hosted in the cloud on Business Central, in Azure, or hosted locally on your internal network for a on-prem deployment. So let's just look at what is an offline environment. So for offline environments, there are several examples that I can give, but for the most important point is that an offline environment will have more than one database deployed to various locations or sites. Because of these distributed databases, data needs to be updated on a regular basis. Often, offline capabilities are needed for when there is no high-speed network connection or a very bad high latency network connectivity at a store. In this scenario, we will then require an offline environment, meaning separate databases will be required to be set up within a store, either one database per store or sometimes a database per POS terminal, and all of them will require data replication to keep them all up to date. This all depends on what type of distribution database structure you put in place. So currently, I live in South Africa. For us, having an online environment here is very challenging, simply because often the sites of our stores can be in areas that do not have a reliable network connection. This, of course, poses a big challenge for us. Luckily, thanks to the offline capability from LS Retail, we are able to deploy offline environments through distributed databases and implement replication so that when a store's network connection goes offline, then of course replication will stop. But once it comes back online, replication continues and data is flowing back and forth between databases again. Okay, so let's get to it. I'm now going to connect to my demo environment where I will be run through all my setups so that you can make sure that you have all the components that you need before we can start setting up our demo environment. Okay, so I have connected to my virtual environment. This is currently running on Windows 10 that I'm running as a virtual environment on Hyper-V. So just running through some of the environment details quickly. You'll see that this is a Windows 10 environment, 64-bit. In this demo that I'm going to be doing today, I'll only use one, but I'll use many companies so that you get an idea of what it is to replicate and how do you set it up, and also to understand how do you replicate between various sites. So I'll explain that in a lot of detail a little later on. So my next thing just to run through is I just want to show you, I've put some of the stuff here at the bottom. These are the software that we're going to be using. So the next thing is essentially our middle tier. As you can see, it looks very familiar to your normal Dynamics nav middle tier. It's quite similar. All the same, company name, service instance, your SQL configuration and database names, etc. And then your client ports where you can then make additional changes for compression and that kind of thing. Your web services and your data services, if you ever used any of those. Then another important one is the NAS services. So with LS Retail, you have something called a scheduler, and this normally gets configured here, which will basically drive the scheduler process. So this will then continuously run the scheduler, and if there are any jobs that are meant to run at a specific point in time, it will then kick those off automatically without any human intervention, if you will. So that will not be doing today, but just for the sake of information, I would like to just show you where this is set up. Um, okay, so that's basically the standard, and we're not going to do any development today, so that's fine. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and then I'm just going to move on to our role-tailored environment. So the reason why I've chosen the role-tailored client for Business Central is just to make sure that it's familiar between many versions of Nav as well as Business Central. And because the layout of the web client of Business Central is so very different, I would rather do this in the role-teller client for Business Central, which you can then use to apply to early versions of Nav as well, because it looks very much the same. So I'm using this Business Central client. It's sorry, wrong one there. The version is 13.3 for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. This is the one we're going to be using today. And the next thing is the Data Director installation. So I'm just going to go to my software folder here. So this is a Data Director. This is basically the mechanism that we'll be using to move data between sites or databases, if you will. The software, as well as this VM that I'm doing the demo on, can be found and downloaded from the LS Retail website. However, you need access to the partner portal, so you need to be a partner of LS Retail in order to gain access to any of the software that we're going to be using today. So I'm just going to go ahead and install it. So just we're just going to run through a few setups and just to explain a few things. So we're going to leave this as it is to the default path, C program files 86 LS Retail Data Director 3. But on our next page here, this is a couple of things that I want to explain. I see that it's already populated some of the default ones it's wanting to install. So depending on environment, so let's say if you're running Nav or Business Central, that obviously it's for the most part it's the same. So install Data Director service. This option is the core Data Director service that will basically do the replication on our behalf. So basically what will happen is this service will be instructed what to do and where to do it, and it will then go and carry out that instruction at a specific site wherever you've actually sent the request to. So we'll be covering that a little later when we set up our distribution locations. Okay, so the next thing is the client tools. Client tools essentially is just a tools to manage and to monitor Data Director. So I've already installed Data Director here, so I'll just show you a couple of these tools. So you can see here on the menu, the Scheduler Monitor, Job Viewer, Job Monitor, Configuration tool. So basically the main two that we will be using today is the Job Monitor and Configuration tool. So we will be installing the client tools as a standard. However, client tools are remotely driven. So they are developed in such a way that it doesn't need to be on the same machine as where Data Director itself is installed. So as an example, you could essentially have Data Director installed on a server, but your client tool could be installed on your local PC, for instance. It's something very similar like SQL Server, where you can have your SQL Server and your SQL Server database on a server, and your SQL Server Management Studio could be installed on any other machine, and you just remotely connect to it. Okay, so we're not going to use cFront. cFront essentially is a direct database to database replication mechanism. We don't use that at all anymore. And also Data Director 2 is for very old clients, so we're not going to use that at all either. But these two at the bottom, we want all these add-ons to be installed in both the Roleteller client folder and the service folder for the middle tier. So this is going to remain ticked, and we're just going to go next, and this is just confirmation page with where it's going to be installed and all the additional tasks that it's going to be performing. So I'm just going to go ahead and install there. So while it's installing, I just want to mention something else with regards to environments and security. So with Data Director, it's the recommended environment essentially is to have VPNs set up between your sites. And the reason for this is that you don't want to worry about people looking at your traffic. So you don't want to send data across the internet for other people to see. So in my opinion, it's the best way is really just to set up your VPNs, and not having to worry about opening up ports, you know, creating a security risk for uh, people trying to connect to your environment from the internet. So you keep everything safe all in one place, and only your internal servers can communicate and replicate data. And with VPNs, I've also found that deploying Data Director is often so much easier because you don't have to worry about the ports. Because if you miss one port, then you have a lot of other issues. It doesn't want to connect, and you have to debug the log and see what's happening, and it just wastes so much time. It becomes so difficult to deploy, um, which is just why I stick to VPNs. It's so much easier. Okay, so my installation has finished, so I'm just going to go ahead and click finish there. Okay, so let me just close this as well. So just I want to just explain the different login mechanisms for Data Director. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to Management Studio for SQL Server. So basically with Data Director, you have two types of authentication. You can either use database authentication, which is a normal SQL Server user, and you can also use Windows login. So if you have a environment where you have Active Directory deployed, which is quite ideal because then you can manage security and permissions from a central point. For this demo, I'm going to be creating a database login. So I've just logged into my SQL instance on my local machine. Now this will obviously be wherever you're going to be replicating data from and to. Now just consider that I'm working off a single environment. Now normally in the event you're going to have multiple sites, you'll have, let's say, a head office and a store, you'll have two of these environments, and you'll have to perform the exact same thing on both of them. So if I'm going to create a new user, I'm going to have to create it in both locations. So on SQL Server for both the store and for head office itself, in order for replication to function properly, because it will require access to extract the information where you're replicating from, which essentially is your source, and then you'll need permission to insert data at your destination to where you're actually replicating the data. So just to make it a little bit more clear. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to create a user called data director. Yeah, data director. So I'm just going to put in like password p. This is w0rd. This is w0rd. I'm going to just remove this enforce policy. Not really worried about security at this moment since it's only a demo, but it might be something useful for when you set up a production environment. Okay, so the other setups that is required, so your server roles would be sysadmin, and your user mapping will be for that database, which is where your nav ls or your ls central essentially environment is. This is basically what you're going to be doing is you're going to tick that database, you're going to give it db owner, and you're going to say okay. So essentially what we've done now is we created a user which has got full access to this database and this environment, and we will then be able to replicate from and to this database with this login detail that I've just created. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to set up my distribution location. I'm going to explain that in just a minute. But what I want to do is just come back to the authentication mechanisms that you can use. So the one is a Windows login and the other is a database login like I've created just now. So if in the event you want to use Windows logins, you will have to change the service for LS Retail Data Director to the Windows login. So just quickly, if you go to the LS Data Director 3 service, you'll see it runs on the local system because it's authenticating via a database login. So it doesn't need the actual service Windows Authentication login to authenticate against the database. But in the event you actually want to do that, you would normally go here and then you'll change the login to that specific domain account or Windows account, which then, and you'll obviously have to restart the service, but then this will allow you to log into that database with this Windows login. The other thing that you'll have to do is once you've changed this is also make sure that you set up that Windows login under your SQL database. So you'll also have to give it the exact same permissions like we have with this this database login. So it'll have per public system admin, and it will also have um, DB owner and public on that specific database you are going to be replicating from and to. Okay, so just covering the basics there. That's basically your permission set. And we're going to deal with the setup of the distribution locations next. So we've basically covered the installation of Data Director, the permissions that we're going to be requiring, and we've created the new user that we will be using in our demo environment. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go to my role-tailored environment, because this is essentially where all of it's going to happen. Is we're going to replicate from here and do all the setups for Data Director. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just look for something called a distribution location. Now, what this is essentially a setup that determines where I'm going to be replicating data from or to. And I'll show you how that fits into the whole scheduler job at a later stage. But basically what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to choose head office because this database that I have is essentially a head office database. For my demo purposes, that doesn't really matter. Even if I have many databases that are head office, it doesn't really matter. But when it's in a production environment, you'll have to differentiate between what is a head office and what is a store, which is normally done by the retail setup. Now, this obviously you'll see here the local store number is head office. Now, if it is a store database, this obviously wouldn't be head office. It will be whatever your store name is, which you'll actually go and select here. So just to show you, the actual version of LS Retail that we are using is the LS Central 13.04. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to my distribution location because it's essentially where we're going to be doing all the replication from and to. So our distribution location will contain various things like a company name, the login username and password, the database server name, and the path. Now, this obviously tells Data Director or instructs Data Director how to connect, what to connect with, and where to find the database and what is the database name. Now, you'll find that there's a whole bunch of things here that needs to be set up, including this, and we're going to run through it just now quickly. And then you'll have a tick here which says active for replication. Now, this means that if I use this distribution location in a replication job, if it's not enabled, it will not replicate to or from it. So nothing will happen, or it will actually tell you that it's not active for replication. Okay, so this is active. We're going to just change this name. So I'll explain these fields just now. I just want to go ahead and get my server name. So this obviously is very important because Data Director will need to know what is the server name of this particular distribution location. So I'm going to go ahead and just type host name. Sorry, host name. And you'll see it says there LS Central. So I'm just going to copy that and close that. So the distribution server is essentially for where the data director for the site sits. Now, sometimes in most cases, the data director and the SQL server is installed on the exact same machine. So this field and this one would be all the same. But if you have a data director that's sitting on a separate machine to the SQL database, then whatever that SQL server name is, but then the distribution server would be the server name of where the data director is actually installed. So because mine is all on the same machine, I'm just going to go ahead and populate both of them because the SQL server as well as the distribution server or the data director server, if you will, is on the exact same machine. Now, if you go ahead and look at the user ID, I want you to remember that user that we set up in SQL. So I'm going to be using SQL Server Authentication. So what I'm going to be doing is just populate the server user account. I'm just going to go ahead and populate that account and okay. So let me just type this director. This is the user account for that SQL login that we've created, and then the password will put in there. Now, before we can actually test this connection, and you can actually do it up here on the ribbon, it says test connection. That essentially will connect to the SQL database by using the credentials that you've provided and try and connect to that database. Okay, so essentially what we're going to be doing is just change the company name because this is not the right company name. So I'm just going to go back to nav and you'll see up here, you can even go to select company. I only have one, so this is my head office company. I'm just going to go back here, put that in there. So for this purpose of the introduction to replication, this is basically all the fields that you need to populate for the replication. Often this is also required, so if you do like object replication, which will be covered in a separate video, You will have to populate all of these as well because so the middle tier is often used to recompile objects. So you'll need the server name, the instance name, and the nav management port of that site where the middle tier is installed in order for it to compile those objects like tables, for instance. Okay, so for now, I'm just going to leave it as it is, and I'm going to go test connection, and it's going to ask me, do I want to test a connection to head office? And I'm going to say yes. Now you'll see this is actually complained. It says login failed, and I think my password is wrong. So I'm just going to go and retype it. Okay, this seems to be taking a little moment. There we go. I can't connect. So this is quite interesting. I'm going to go back to my SQL login that I've created. So the name is correct. So I think I might have mistyped my password. So what I'm going to be doing quickly is just change it to something very simple. Let me just call it P password. PR. So password all lowercase. So this obviously will be different in your production environment. The more difficult your passwords are, the better for your security of your environment. So I'm just going to put that new password in there, and let's test this again. Okay, so it does not like it at all. I'm actually wondering, cannot open. Oh, that's probably why I didn't specify any database path or name. So basically, I just want to grab the database name here. Okay, great. So we have that. So the database path name is essentially the LS13. That would be your actual database name that you're going to be connecting to for that site. So at that point, you'll then get the database name from your site, and it has to match, otherwise it will not allow you to connect. So as you could see, it errored before, and now it says the connection was tested successfully. So it means that Data Director could access my SQL Server with the login I provided, that Data Director login account. And the one thing I had missing was just the actual database path and name. If you have a custom environment, like when you have a specific instance name for a specific site, you will actually have to provide that as well on your distribution location card in order for Data Director to know how to access your database. So just as an example, I will show you what it will look like. So on your database server name, you will actually put in like that. So we'll provide a backslash and then my instance. So the my instance will essentially be replaced with whatever instance you have set up, and this is what it will look like. So it'll be your server slash instance name. That way Data Director will know how to access this database. So now that we have our distribution location for head office configured, we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new company, which will be our store company, to which I'll be replicating data to. So I'm just going to go ahead and close this, and I'm going to go into nav, and I'm going to go companies. Uh, Now this basically will show you all the companies that are in your current Business Central or nav database. So I'm just going to go ahead and say copy. So I'm copying my head office database, and I'm just going to call it Cronus. Let's just put it the exact same. I'm just going to call it Cronus LS13 store. Okay, so that this one, the one that I'm currently in, is my head office, and this one will be my store. So in a production environment, you'll have separate machines like I explained before. But in my case, I'll have just separate companies. So I'll replicate to the exact same SQL database, the exact same SQL server. But the only thing that will be different is my company names, which is basically the only thing that'll be different in my replication. So while the company is being created, I'm just gonna pause this for a second. Okay, so as you can see, the company copy has successfully completed. So I'm just going to go ahead and press OK there. I should have two companies now. You'll see my current head office company and then my store company that I've just created. So I'm going to remain in my head office company for the time being. I'm just going to copy this store company name for setting up the distribution location. So I'm just going to go back here to my distribution location list. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create, well, in fact, I'm actually not going to create a distribution location. I'm just going to use one that's already here. So I'll just use store 0001 because, yeah, it's essentially a store distribution location. So I'll just change these setups and configure them with the right ones. And then we'll test and make sure that we can connect to our store company. Okay, so let's start with the top section. So it's always TCP unless you are using TCPS. Normal environments are just normal TCP. Server is called LS Central, if you remember from our configuration earlier for our head office. But obviously that might change if you have separate machines, so if your store is separate from your head office. So this essentially again is where the data director service will sit for the distribution server. So because mine's all on the same machine, I'll just populate that there. Now, server ports, because I don't specify them, it will assume the defaults. But if you have to replicate or connect on specific ports, you can specify them manually. I'm not going to do so. Then the next thing is the company name. Now, the company name is essentially the one that I've just created. So this distribution location in head office is for the store. It's to tell head office how do I connect to the store. So I have to provide it with the company name. I have to provide it with the login details. So data director and then password. And again, because my environment contains a single database, it will use the exact same login that I've already set up. Then DB server name is where my SQL server sits. So fortunately for us, for this demo, it's all on the same server. So I'm just going to copy that in there. And the database name is the same. It's LS13. If your store database name is different from your head office, you will then go ahead and populate that in there. So you'll see the versions of SQL is also in here. Our head office one was version 13. So if I go back to SQL, you see version 13 up there in my instance. So I'll be changing this to version 13 as well, same as my head office distribution location. But if it's running on a different version of SQL, which is not entirely recommended, to have multiple SQL versions between sites, you can change this to specify a different version of SQL should you need to. Okay, so network type, we're going to leave as TCP. It's active for replication. For now, that's essentially all we need. Now, always make absolutely sure that you can connect to the database using these credentials that you've just specified. So I'm just going to go ahead and test the connection. So I'm just going to go say yes. It says okay. The connection was tested and successfully in 0.765 seconds. Right. So we know that in our head office company, we can connect to our store company, which is basically what we've done now. So we essentially have, and maybe I should just do this. Um, is 1, 2, 3, like so, so that we only have these two. So you'll see that both of these database names are exactly the same, although my caps is a little different here on the database server name. That's not really a problem. But the only thing that basically differentiates these two, so if I go to head office, you'll see the company name here is different, and my store name, my store company is obviously different as well. Okay, so that essentially means that in head office, I can essentially now replicate data down to the store. So what I'm going to be doing next is show you a little bit of how the scheduler works and how do you run it. So let me just, I'm going to keep this open here at the bottom. So I just want to minimize this thing. And then I'm going to go to the scheduler. Now you'll notice that there's quite a lot of schedulers here. So it's usually the task one, the one that's got a little tick mark next to it. This is the one we want. So if you look at this, so this is basically what the scheduler looks like. It's a whole bunch of jobs. Some of them will replicate data. Some of them will perform specific actions, right? So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to pick one here, which is already set up for us. I'll just change a few things and then we'll use that to actually replicate data between our databases. Um, but before I do that, I actually want to open up two sessions. So basically what I want to do is have two sessions open here. Let's just minimize that. I want to open up a Business Central session and just connect to my other store. So my store company. So I just want to do this. So you'll see that if I go here, company, and I'm going to select the store company here. Let me just put that there. Okay, so the one is connecting to my head office company. The other one is connected to my store. Now, I will be running the scheduler in head office, and it will connect to my store company, which I have here on the right, and it will go and modify specific data. So I'm going to go back in head office to my scheduler, and I'm going to try and keep everything left and right based on the head office and store company. So we said we're going to look at using the items, for instance. So I'm just going to go to navigate. I've selected that job now, which is called items. I'm going to go to the job card. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's happening here. Now you'll have a whole bunch of tabs here. A lot of them is not really relevant for this exercise, but location is one of them, and object setup. So location does is it will instruct data director where to fetch the information from and where to send it to. So you'll have the from location code, and on your right you'll have the to location code. So what this means is the from location code, whatever data you are sending, you will replicate from that specific distribution location, which is the setups we've done earlier in this video. And then the to location is where I am going to send it to. So the data I'm busy replicating, where is it going to go? So firstly, I'm just going to go head office. So I've selected head office. Now this is the one we've set up earlier that will connect to our head office company. And by using the distribution location, it already knows how to connect with what password, which instance, because we've already set that up. And then now the to location, we're going to select our store on the right hand side, so the store company. So I'm just going to change this to single location, and I'll just say yes. And then when I say to location code, I'll specify the store that I've set up as my store location code. So I'll use S0001. Now this store is also set up so it knows how to access the store company. And obviously it's on the same SQL server and the same machine, but in real life, in a production environment, it will most likely be a separate machine. So your server name and your SQL instance and your login details might be different. Okay, so I'm just going to configure this. So I've set it to my from location to head office and my to location to the actual store, which I've set up to replicate to my store company on the right. There are various types of replication mechanisms. So you have actions, which is essentially actions and pre-actions, which is should records change, it will flag them or create a log of sorts to say this particular record has been changed and that record will be replicated down. The other is replication counters. So it has an integer or a number field um, which it keeps track of. So each time a new record is created or modified, this number increments, and then the scheduler will keep track of what was the last number it replicated. So I'm just going to show you something down here. So these are essentially called subjobs. So this determines what it is that I'm going to be sending. So you'll see barcodes, there's BOM versions, there's categories, and a whole bunch of other things, item labels, the actual item itself, its variants associated to it. And you'll see here on the subjob type, a lot of it is by actions. And then one is normal, which uses replication counters. So that's basically one of the records we're going to be changing in just a minute. So before we actually start replicating, I want to show you how and what the job monitor does. So I'm just gonna go here and go job monitor. I've also pinned it here at the bottom, so I'll use that. This is basically what the job monitor looks like. Now, the DD host connection is essentially where the data director is installed, the one that I actually want to connect to. So, like I mentioned before, these tools are um, developed in such a way that it's a remote tool. It doesn't need to be on the same server as where Data Director is installed. You just point it to where Data Director is installed, and then you can connect to it. Just, of course, make sure that your firewall on that server also allows those ports to be connected to. So I'm just going to go to LS Central. That's my local machine. So whether I replicate or to and from specific sites, you'll see everything right here. But if you have two separate sites, you have a head office and a store, you'll connect to both data directors, which one will be for head office, the other one will be for the store. And you'll have two job monitors open. So you could see the packets being replicated from the head office database using the head office data director, and then you'll see the packet arrive at the store data director and as it gets extracted and inserted into the database. Now, if there's an issue at the store, for instance, if let's say the permissions isn't correct on the SQL Server database, it will then, at the store level, you will see some of the lines show in red and it will actually give you an error message if your login details are incorrect. So I'm going to show you what this looks like as the packet moves. But before I do that, I just want to go to the item card. So in head office, I'm going to go and change a detail. So each job obviously has a specific purpose. I'm just going to go to retail items. So this is the retail version for items. So I'm just going to go and modify one. Now, because we're using a specific job, which is called items, that is the job that will replicate any data revolving around items. So anything I change in here will be replicated to my store company if the subjobs are set up properly. So what I'm going to be doing is I want to change this description, for instance, and I want to change it to red bicycle. Okay, so I've done that. So now I've made a change. So this is no longer bicycle, it's now changed to red bicycle. Okay, so I've changed this. I'm going to go okay now. So you'll see it's changed here. I'm just going to minimize this for a while. And I'm going to go to the retail items on my right. So this is now the retail items at a store level. Okay, so there we are. You see it's still red bicycle on the left, it's still bicycle on the right. Because these are obviously two different companies, they don't share data at all. And that's why we need replication to update our distributed databases from head office. Because head office is often, in most cases, the central place where your master data, for instance, gets changed and distributed to all of your stores. So what I'm going to do now is I need to run the scheduler in order to replicate this change from my head office company to my store company. So I'm going to go back to the scheduler. I've got it open here, and this items one that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to go back to the job car quick. So it's gonna, you'll see that there are like many subjobs, one of which is the item. This is the item table. That's where I made that specific change. And now when I go run, it's going to instruct DataDirect to replicate data based on the replication method that's used for each subjob. And it will tell it where to fetch it from and where to replicate the data to. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this quickly. So I'm just going to say, yes, I want to process this items job. Okay, and then you can see how many actions were processed and one more normal subjob. So these are just the number of actions that were replicated. So that would be part of some of the other subjobs that contain changes that haven't been replicated yet. And one normal subjob is essentially this one that's replication is set to normal, but it's got a replication counter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to close this and I'm going to close the scheduler as well. So we're back here. So you'll see that they are still exactly the same. And if I open up my job monitor to check what has actually happened, you will see two packets actually. So these lines we actually call packets, and you'll see it says it's done and it's grayed out because there's no issues. It's actually replicated a lot of records. Now you'll see that there's quite a lot of records that were modified, and this is simply because there were a whole bunch of other subjobs that were part of that job that I ran. So what I'm expecting to see is my change from bicycle to red bicycle in the store company. Okay, so both of these are successful. You can see they grayed out and they said it's done. Normally, if you have an error, this line at the bottom, as you select each of these, will show red. And if you scroll to the right, you will have like an error, or in the message, it will tell you what the issue is. So if it's permission, it will tell you cannot log in with this user. But in our case here, everything is fine because we've tested our distribution locations up front So we didn't expect any permission errors to occur. So I'm going to minimize this job monitor because now we've confirmed our replication has completed. I'm going to minimize this, and now you'll see that this is still the same. So we're actually expecting it to be red bicycle and not bicycle. But I'm going to activate it and just refresh and see what happens. So now basically what's happened is the data has replicated from our head office company into our store company. And it's updated the description like it was supposed to, as we expected it to. So this is quite a simple form of replication. So you could go and update many records at the same time. Essentially, you could go and update a whole lot of these, and then they will all replicate to the site and update the descriptions, whatever changes you make on those items. So we can do one more. I'll do milk. I'll just change the description to something silly, sour milk. Okay, so there we go. I've changed it now, so you can see this is still what it was originally. Because I haven't replicated any of the data yet, so the changes happened in the head office company, and I need to replicate it to my store company. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, I don't have it open yet. So back to the scheduler. Now remember the one with the tick mark, which is the actual task itself. So we were using the items replication job. So what I'm going to do is go to navigate, go to job card, and you can run it directly from here again. And I'll say, yes, I do. And it's now instructed the director to replicate the changes again. So I'm just going to close this again. I'll leave that open for a bit. If we go to our job monitor, you should see a new packet has been created and it is done. So there's no issues here. Replication was successful, so I'm going to minimize that again. And essentially what we're expecting now is to see the sour milk to come up. Now, the only reason why we are not seeing that change already is because the record that you're seeing is an actual old record. So if we go refresh here at the top, we should actually see the change being applied and the new records being fetched from the database. Okay, so that's essentially the replication from my side. I mean, you can go and replicate a whole bunch of other items. If you go to the scheduler itself, let's just open it up there. You can see there's many other jobs here that you can test and play with. So there's there's transactions if you were using a POS. That is basically the job that will replicate transactions from a POS to head office. There's discounts like periodic discounts and promotions and that kind of thing. If you wanted to push that down to specific stores or all stores, like if you have a sale or something like that, that's what you'll use. And yeah, there's quite a few others here as well, replenishment, which you can use, and store information. So if you make changes to stores on the store cards or whatever, that you can use to update older stores with new information. Very similar to the way we've just changed these descriptions on the item card for the stores. So you saw it replicated, and as soon as you refresh, the changes appear immediately. So our replication was successful.